Welcome to the Meet Me podcast, a podcast all about our multifaceted human nature and constant journey through self-discovery, with personal stories and insights around trauma, motherhood, relationships, spirituality, and individuality. I'm your host, Michelle Malik. Thanks for listening. Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Meet Me podcast. As always, I'm your host, Michelle Malik, and through this podcast, I hope to encourage others to transmute and transform their experiences and trauma into power, purpose, and connection. Super excited to sit down today for another solo cast episode. I've been looking forward to providing just a couple life updates, some of the lessons that I've been working through currently as well. And before we dive fully into the episode, I will somewhat be referencing one of my previous episodes. So if you haven't heard it yet, you can check out episode 6, Meet Me While I Embrace Change. In that episode, I do share the story of when I got laid off from my previous job and some of the things that I went through during that time, kind of leading up to manifesting the release from that position. But there's going to be a lot of mirroring from that episode, which is the only reason why I bring it up, because I actually just recently got laid off from my most recent job. So, referencing back to episode 6, where I shared that story, I had explained, leading up to that time, I had been thinking about getting released from that position for quite some time, putting it out there, putting out intentions, applying to jobs, really felt like it was all going to come together. And then it did. And that time when I had set those intentions and really been intentional about being released from my position, I had also put in intentions of receiving a severance and getting a month off of work before starting a new position. And everything checked off. I got the severance. That was a bit unexpected, to be honest, but I, trusted that I would receive that since that's what I had put my mind to. And signed my offer letter for this most recent position literally like a month and 2 days from when I had lost that prior job. And so, of course, coming into my newest role, I had this idolized version of how it was all going to play out. I felt like there was good opportunity to make some money because of the commission structure. So I was excited about that. Always had my sights set on, doing healing and growing the podcast and developing this side of the business with my passion projects down the line. But going into that new position, I had it in my mind that I would work there for maybe a year, maybe a little over a year, stack up some money, save that, put it away, while all the while working on my passion projects on the side. Well, when I started that job, and this is also something I had previously mentioned on the podcast as well, there were red flags almost immediately. I kind of ignored them because, again, I was holding on to this idolized version of how this job was going to solve all of my problems and allow me to reach the level of success that I was looking for at that time. But throughout this process, after, a couple months, certain red flags were popping up. They weren't really necessarily affecting me too hard at first. So I was just going with the flow. After a while, it started to really get to me. The environment really became very toxic. This is a very small company that I worked for. So, like, literally less than 10 employees in the whole company across different states. And already I started there in September, got laid off a couple of weeks ago in April. So I was there just over 6 months, close to 7 months. Within that time, I had seen multiple people get laid off out of nowhere, unexpectedly to us. I had seen multiple people up and quit without notice, even in higher level positions, which also set up some fire alarms for me because those two events in and of themselves do say something, especially in a professional environment. Maybe the culture isn't the best. I definitely saw those signs from, upper level management, but because of my position, I was sort of separated from it for a little while. And so I was able to kind of be on my own island. I was, after a couple layoffs over time, I became the only remote employee, which I wanted to really hold on to, was so grateful for, try to really shift my focus to gratitude, even though there were definitely things happening that caused some stress and made me feel anxious that maybe I might not be here very long or whatever. And I really had to finally get to a point after more and more changes kept happening. My job kept switching from like different focus areas. I was getting stretched thinner and thinner. And I had already decided, I mean, really, since the birth of my son, my boundaries when it came to work have shifted dramatically. Before my son, I was always a hard worker. I was always willing to put in extra hours, extra time, to the point where I was like breaking my back to get things done in order for the company or my team to succeed. I was a very dedicated employee. I always have been. But after the birth of my son, anybody who is a parent out there understands that sometimes your priorities just shift. And where I used to be willing to dedicate endless amounts of hours and, kill myself even under stress and all of these things, still continuing to perform and have output, I just didn't feel that way anymore. Instead, I wanted to close my laptop right at 5 o'clock at night, maybe check for things if there was emergencies just because of the line of work that I was in. Sometimes things would come up after hours, but really not dedicating my full energy to working a job past the 40 hours that I was designated for in the week. It became pretty clear that that was not aligned with what this company was expecting or wanting out of their employees. And so again, it kind of was going on for a couple months of just feeling really stressed, really strained, but still being firm in my boundaries, not going above and beyond necessarily, but doing enough to get me through the day, to get me through the week so that I still felt accomplished and so that things were still getting done. But there was definitely a level of me that started to feel more and more that this maybe wasn't going to be the job that solves all my problems, makes me a ton of money to where I can eventually put that away and start working towards my dream business. I would say maybe 2 to 3 months before the layoff happened, I started setting intentions again, similar to how I did with my last job, really affirming that I had come to this understanding that this was no longer for me. It's served its purpose, but also really being clear that I deserved better. Because again, some of the treatment that was happening to other employees, as well as myself, towards the end, it got really nasty actually. I realized that where I'm at in my personal spiritual development, I know what I'm deserving of. And I hope that you get to a point where you understand that you are deserving of everything that you want and more. And I was tired of sacrificing my self worth for this company that has clearly been fine letting people go without notice or people up and leaving. So I didn't really feel like I needed to dedicate more of myself to a company that clearly wasn't dedicated to its people. So, about a month before the layoff happened, things really started to intensify. Again, there were constant shifts in direction, a lot more pressure on our output and what we needed to get done throughout the day. All these things really heavy, like metric tracking, which I have never done well in. I don't really love environments that are very numbers driven when they don't have to be. I feel like I'm an adult and I know what I need to get done and I'm going to get that done. And that's usually how I've been treated in previous jobs. But that started to become a thing. And I finally got to a point where it started to feel like every step I made in that position, it just wasn't enough for them. And I didn't feel like I was succeeding anymore. I felt like I was constantly trying to play catch up, constantly trying to make them happy with my performance. As that progressed, it became extremely uncomfortable for me because, again, I've always been like a high achiever, a dedicated employee. I always have been, somebody that's willing to help other people and really, again, dedicate my time and energy to the company that I'm working at. But as this started to happen, and I got more and more frustrated that things just weren't working out in the way that I had hoped. And every direction that I turned, there was toxicity or negativity. And finally, I just got to the point where I was like, this needs to happen. I need to be done here. And again, I had kind of started setting those intentions a couple months before, but my ego got a little bit in the way towards the end because naturally, as humans, we want to succeed in the things that we put our time and energy towards, right? And so while I was still working there, even though I had it set that I was on my way out, that something was going to happen and that I would be able to be removed from this position, there was still a part of me that felt a little bit of guilt or shame because of the feedback that I would receive on certain things that, again, I wasn't doing enough, I wasn't good enough. And for somebody who has always been like an overachiever slash perfectionist, that really took a hit to my ego. But what I had to remind myself, and a mantra that I'll share with you, something that I kept repeating to myself over the course of that time was, you are not supposed to succeed in a place that no longer serves you. We are not supposed to succeed in places or situations that no longer serve us. And that makes so much sense, right? And it's a lot easier to say it than it is to really embody that when it's happening. Because again, we, out of just sheer nature, we want to be successful. And the idea of failing at something hurts so much because we've been conditioned to always want success. But the thing that I reminded myself through that mantra, and that I hope to remind anybody and encourage anybody who might find themselves in a similar situation, is that your success might be on the other side of this failure. And so again, I just kept repeating that to myself and reminding myself every time things really got bad. And had this been a couple years ago, I probably would have gone straight to the guilt and the shaming myself, saying like, you're not good enough. You can't do this right. You don't deserve this job. All these negative things that are made to put us down in situations. But I decided to look at it differently. And again, I decided to look at it as an opportunity for me to recognize that while I might be failing in this particular role, in this particular situation, that doesn't make me a failure. Because by recognizing that I'm failing and accepting that I'm failing in something that I've already decided I no longer align with, that I'm no longer energetically or spiritually or emotional aligned with, it just made that release a lot easier because I wasn't clinging on to something that needed to be let go. And I'm sharing all of this because, yes, this is a recent example. And obviously, I'm talking about just my most recent layoff, but there have been so many times in my life where my instant reaction to not succeeding in something or failing at something was to make myself feel bad about it, was to blame myself and tell myself things like, you're the reason that this happened. If you tried harder, if you did something differently, maybe it would have worked out. And that mentality doesn't get us anywhere. And this is not to say that we can't take accountability for our actions. Of course, if we make mistakes, if we do things that are incorrect, we have to own up to those things. But I look back on so many situations, whether it be jobs, maybe even interviews that I thought I would get the job and I ended up not getting it, or relationships, intimate relationships, romantic relationships, or even friendships where I felt some level of rejection or failure in maintaining that bond or that relationship with whoever it is. How many times have you found yourself in a situation where you felt like a failure? You felt like you did everything wrong, you're blaming yourself, and then maybe months or even years go by and you realize that that was actually the best thing that ever happened to you because it opened your eyes to something that you weren't aware of before while you were in that situation. And so I really encourage, this is like this whole idea of rejection being a redirection, which is something that I've shared before too, that I really try to keep in my mind when things aren't going the way that I want. Rejection is a redirection, and accepting failure can be leading to your success. So I encourage you to maybe look at situations, whether it be in your present circumstances or in the past, areas or situations where you felt this knee jerk reaction to blame yourself for failing or had this like failure mentality around it. And I encourage you to try to reframe that and think about, was this something that I really needed to succeed in? Or was by me failing or it failing exactly what I needed to get to where I'm trying to go? And every situation is going to be different. You know, anything that I share on the podcast or that you hear, it's always, there's never like a blanket statement or a blanket solution to every individual problem. We have to take what we hear, what we resonate with, and apply it with our own intuition, with our own discernment, because at the end of the day, only you can decide if something is for you or not. And for me, deciding that this job was not for me, it was made a lot easier over time as things got really toxic and nasty. And there was, you know, things happening behind my back that I was finding out about. And I just, that petty stuff is just not aligned with where I'm trying to be in a work environment, in relationships, or anything. But again, you know, going into that job, I had this idealized version of what it would look like. So there was a little piece of me that was still trying to hold on to it, thinking like, well, maybe things will shift. Maybe I'll land a new account that'll make me a ton of money and I can still hold on to my original plan. Because again, it's so natural for us to cling on to situations and try and strive for that feeling of success because failure just doesn't feel good. But again, when you're finding yourself in repetitive cycles, are you actually meant to succeed there? Or are you meant to succeed somewhere else? And we can't get to somewhere else if we're still holding on to the thing that's no longer for us, right? And of course, this might be a lot more difficult to work through or to accept, especially if we're talking about, you know, really close relationships or especially like romantic relationships. But I hear it all the time where people find themselves in these situations holding on to this ideal version of a person, of a relationship. Maybe it was that way once before, and now it's no longer that way. But we have to get to a point where we again use our own discernment and decide, is what I'm in currently still serving me? And if not, what do I need to do? Is it a simple acceptance that needs to happen, or are there steps that need to be taken in order to remove ourselves from that situation, right? So, again, I encourage you to look at your life situations and try to give yourself some grace through those instances where you really felt like you've failed. And if there are instances where you think back and you realize, like, man, I could have done this differently, okay, great. Take that lesson and apply it to the new situation that you're working towards, because that's what all of this is. And I felt that when I got into this job and I started to see those red flags, I realized that I was knee deep in another lesson that was trying to teach me that I needed to stand up for myself, but also take a chance on myself. And so when I lost my job previously, you know, where I talk about in episode 6, and I had this in my mind that I was only going to be unemployed for 1 month and get into a new job, and it all happened. And so I figured, okay, great. Since that manifestation happened, clearly this is going to play out exactly how I wanted to. And so when it didn't, that is frustrating. But I realized that by putting these parameters around my situation, it actually held me stuck in thinking that I needed that comfort or needed that type of work environment in order to get to my success. When this happened leading up to it, and I had set out my intentions, and I actually found out early on that I was going to get laid off. They didn't realize that I knew before it happened, but I got some insight and I was kind of preparing for it to happen. And when it actually happened, I was pretty frustrated by the way that they went about it, but it just again affirmed that this was not a place for me. One of the other lessons that I took away from this is that rather than putting my dreams and my aspirations on hold in order to fit this like logical idea of how I can succeed in these areas, I let go of that as well. And so I guess all of this is to say that I'm now unemployed, not working a normal job. And I honestly don't have really any intention to go back to one unless I get to a point where financially it just does not make sense for me to continue without. But I'm using this time and trying to be as productive as I can alongside my passion projects, growing those things and seeing where life takes me and like surrendering and trusting that because I accepted that failure and because I'm not forcing myself back into the cycle of expecting another job to get me exactly where I want to be in the position that I'm in. I'm not to say people who work traditional jobs, you absolutely might be exactly where you want to be based on your education and if it's aligned with your passion. I'm just saying for where I'm at, working a corporate environment doesn't really feel aligned to what it is I'm trying to do. I'm trying to spread these messages and be in touch with my intuition and my spiritual journey and support others through that as well. And like a standard 9 to 5 corporate job just isn't really serving that purpose anymore. And I really had to battle with myself. And I've been battling with myself over that since this happened, because although I feel so grateful that I got removed from that environment after asking for that and putting out those intentions, I'm now kind of having to figure out what's within my power and what it is that I need to do next. And that can be really scary, especially again, I've like worked in a structured environment since I started working at 18 years old, always, with a specific schedule, always with managers who told me what to do and when to do it. And now I don't have any of that as support. But again, it all comes down to what's going to get you where you want to go. So, really, I just wanted to share that update so that you know where I'm at, but also what I've taken away from it. And I hope that you can really apply that to situations in your own life. Like I said, whether it be a job that's no longer serving you, that's toxic, whether it be a relationship, a situation, a place. I hope that you can look at failure in this way with a new perspective to help you realize that failing at something, failing in something doesn't have to take away from your self-worth. Failing does not inherently mean that you yourself are a failure. And that's really what I want to get across here. Trust that if you're bringing awareness, if you're listening to yourself and what it is that you really need to feel fulfilled, to feel accomplished, if the thing that you're battling about or trying to cling on to doesn't serve those things anymore, it might just be time to let go and accept that that path is no longer for you. And as soon as you let go of that path, another one appears. Sending everybody so much love. Thank you, as always, for your time and your energy listening to me. Now that I am not formally working, I do have a lot more availability in regards to my one-on-one healing sessions. So if you're interested in booking with me, you can visit my website. I'll put that in the episode description. Super excited that I have a formal web page now. It is just meetmehealing.com. Again, you'll see the link in the description, but you'll be able to find everything: podcast, healing services. I do plan on starting a blog as well. If anybody out there enjoys more written content, that'll be coming soon. But again, meetmehealing.com. I look forward to getting to heal with more of you soon. If you enjoyed this episode or any previous episodes, please don't forget to rate, write a review, subscribe, and share to help grow the podcast. Your support is always appreciated, and I'm excited to share more with you so soon. Until then, bye.